The great hall of Castle Wessex shimmered with candlelight, but the warmth of the flames could not thaw the frost in the air. Whispers travelled faster than wine that evening, slipping between jewelled goblets and feathered fans. "She married a stableman," one lady sneered, her laughter sharp as broken glass. "The daughter of Lord Wessex, reduced to the smell of hay and leather." Another joined in. "Love, she calls it. More likely madness." At the far end of the hall, Lady Eleanor held her chin high, though her hands trembled inside her silk sleeves. The weight of ridicule pressed upon her like the heavy brocade gown she wore, but her heart refused to bow. She had chosen Aidan, the quiet, steadfast man who once cared for her father's horses, not for his name, but for his soul. The noble's laughter followed her as she moved toward the exit, her slippers brushing against the cold stone. Yet outside, beneath the open sky, the night offered her solace. The scent of damp earth and wild thyme carried from the fields beyond the castle walls, a world she preferred to all the gilded chambers behind her. Aidan was waiting there, near the stables, his tunic plain, but his eyes alight with calm strength. "They've been cruel again," he said softly, sensing her pain before she spoke. "Let them talk," she replied, her voice fragile yet proud. "I married you because I saw truth where they see shame." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Truth is rarely welcomed among those who live on lies." She laughed, though tears lingered at the edge of her vision. "And yet sometimes I wonder if love alone can hold against their scorn." "Love is not all I am, Eleanor," he said, his tone carrying something deeper, an echo of authority, of command she could not yet name. "But it is enough for now." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant whinny of horses. She reached for his hand, rough and warm, the hand of a man who had worked, not inherited, his place in the world. From the towers above, a bell tolled midnight. The revellers still laughed, their voices rising like crows around the feast. Eleanor leaned against Aidan's shoulder. "They laugh at us," she murmured. "At me." "Then let them," he whispered. "For laughter fades faster than truth." She felt the steadiness of his heartbeat, as if the earth itself pulsed through him. In that moment, the cruelty of the court seemed far away, insignificant against the quiet certainty of his embrace. But even as she found peace in his arms, a flicker of unease stirred within her. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, Aidan's eyes wandered northward, to the shadowed hills beyond Wessex, to something unseen, waiting. Eleanor had asked once what he saw there. "Memories," he'd said simply, "and promises." She had not pressed further, unwilling to break the fragile trust that bound them. Yet the mystery of him, the sense that he carried a story far larger than his humble past, began to root in her heart. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm both tender and lonely. The castle servants averted their eyes when she passed. Old friends avoided her company, fearing the taint of scandal. Still, Eleanor walked the corridors with poise, her quiet defiance earning the grudging respect of a few. Each morning, Aidan met her at the stables, where sunlight spilled across the straw and the horses nickered softly. Together, they shared moments of laughter, fleeting but real. And though the world scorned them, she found in those hours a peace she had never known among silks and crowns. To the world, she had married beneath her. To her heart, she had risen above them all. If you believe that love can defy judgment and that truth often hides in the simplest souls, subscribe now, so you don't miss the next chapter of Eleanor and Aidan's journey, where appearances begin to crumble and destiny quietly stirs in the shadows beyond Wessex. Dawn crept softly over the fields of Wessex, turning the mist into ribbons of gold. In the modest cottage just beyond the castle walls, Eleanor stirred from sleep to the faint rhythm of hooves striking the ground. It was Aidan, already at work before the sun had lifted its head above the horizon. His dedication both comforted and worried her. He asked for so little and gave everything. She rose quietly, wrapping a wool shawl over her shoulders, and stepped outside. The air was cool, scented with hay and the sweetness of blooming clover. Aidan stood by the paddock, brushing down a grey mare with steady, practiced motions. The strength in his arms was not brutish but patient, the kind that came from years of labor and silence. "You should eat before the morning's gone," Eleanor called softly. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers with that familiar warmth. "I will, my lady," he replied, teasing her with the title she had once worn so proudly. "Don't call me that," she said with a smile that didn't quite hide her sadness. "The castle has taken it from me." He leaned the brush against the fence. "No one can take what you are, Eleanor. They can only forget what truly matters." Her heart ached with both pride and longing. The world she'd known had turned its back on her. Friends who once praised her grace now whispered her name like a warning. Even the servants, once obedient, greeted her with half-hidden smirks. Yet in this quiet corner of the world, amid straw and soil, she found a different kind of nobility, one that required no crown. Later that morning, they sat together by the hearth, sharing a humble meal of bread and stewed apples. The fire crackled softly as she traced the grain of the wooden table. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The ease, the security of the castle life." Aidan looked thoughtful. "I miss nothing that made me small. I miss the horses, the open fields, but not the men who measured worth by bloodlines." She smiled faintly. "You speak as though you've seen their world more clearly than they have." "Perhaps I have," he answered, his tone quiet but resolute. "When you've lived under a lord's hand, you learn what true strength looks like, and it isn't found in titles." His words struck her deeper than she expected. She often wondered how he could bear their cruelty with such calm, how the laughter and gossip rolled off him like rain from stone. There was something in him, something steady and unbroken, that she could not name. One afternoon, while gathering herbs near the stream, Eleanor overheard two village women talking. "They say the lady's husband has a soldier's bearing," one whispered. "He hides it well, but you can see it in how he stands." "Maybe he was a mercenary," the other replied. "Or maybe he's running from something." The words followed Eleanor like shadows all the way home. That evening, as she tended the small garden outside their cottage, she glanced toward the horizon. Aidan was there again, staring northward, his face unreadable in the fading light. When she approached, he turned, smiling faintly. "You're quiet tonight." "I was listening," she said softly, "to the world that insists it knows who we are." He brushed soil from his hands and met her gaze. "Let them speak. Words cost them nothing, and they mean even less. But you never seem to care," she said. "Don't you ever feel anger?" He hesitated, eyes darkening. "Anger is a fire, Eleanor. If you feed it too long, it burns more than it warms. I've learned that lesson well." She wanted to ask what had taught him such restraint, but his tone left no room for questions. Instead, she reached for his hand, and he squeezed it gently, grounding her in the quiet certainty of his presence. As night descended, they walked back to the cottage, their steps matching in rhythm. The world might laugh, might whisper, but within the fragile walls of their home there was peace, a peace built on trust, not on names. Still, as the wind rustled through the thatched roof, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the life they'd built stood on borrowed time, fragile as the glass of the goblets she had left behind. Autumn arrived early in Wessex that year. The fields turned bronze under the fading sun, and the wind carried whispers from distant lands, rumors that travelled faster than the merchants who brought them. At the market square, talk spread of unrest in the north, of lords rallying behind a forgotten banner, of a missing heir whose name had once commanded loyalty across England. Eleanor listened quietly as she bartered for grain, her hood drawn low, her thoughts circling like restless birds. When she returned home, she found Aidan in the cottage, seated at the table with a parchment in his hand. He moved to hide it as she entered, but she caught a glimpse of the seal, a wolf's head crowned in silver wax. Her breath caught. "Aidan," she said softly, "who writes to you under such a mark?" He paused, his jaw tightening before he answered. "Old acquaintances. Nothing you need worry about." "Nothing?" Her voice trembled between hurt and disbelief. "You receive secret letters sealed with crests I've never seen, and I am to think it's nothing." His eyes met hers, steady yet shadowed. "You know I'd never bring danger to you. Some matters belong to the past." "And yet," she said, folding her arms, "the past seems unwilling to forget you." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind hissed through the thatch, carrying the smell of rain. Eleanor turned away, her heart tangled in doubt. She wanted to believe him, to trust the calm certainty that had always defined him, but the glint of that silver seal lingered in her mind like an unanswered question. That night, she lay awake long after Aidan's breathing had slowed. Moonlight spilled through the window, tracing pale lines across his face. His features, so gentle by day, carried a strength in repose that felt almost regal. It frightened her, the thought that she might not truly know the man beside her. In the days that followed, small signs began to gather like fallen leaves, innocent alone, troubling together. Aidan's absence at odd hours, his quiet glances northward, the faint mark of a sword's callus across his palm. Once, when she reached for his shirt to mend a tear, she saw the faint glimmer of an old scar along his ribs, a wound deep enough to speak of war. He pulled away too quickly. One evening, Eleanor sought counsel from Brother Hugh, the old monk who kept the chapel near the village. If a man hides his past, she asked, does it mean he hides his guilt? The monk studied her with kind eyes. Not always. Some pasts are not sins, my lady, but burdens. The heavier they are, the tighter we hold them. His words offered no peace, only more questions. As she walked home through the mist, her mind churned. Who was Aidan before he came to Wessex? What truth lay behind that guarded silence? When she reached the cottage, Aidan was waiting by the hearth. His expression softened at the sight of her. "You've been troubled," he said. "I've been uncertain," she admitted. "There's a difference." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Eleanor, what do you think I am?" Her answer came without hesitation. "A good man, but a man who hides something too heavy to carry alone." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost in a whisper, "Some truths, Eleanor, can't yet be spoken, not because they are shameful, but because they demand the right time to be heard." She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone, an ache, an exhaustion, held her still. She reached for his hand instead, feeling the tension in his grip, the silent struggle he never voiced. The storm outside broke then, thunder rumbling through the night, and as the rain drummed against the roof, Eleanor lay awake once more, her mind turning toward the north, the same direction Aidan's eyes always sought. Somewhere beyond those hills, the shadows of the crown were stirring again. The autumn rains had passed, leaving the land washed clean and glistening. Yet within Castle Wessex, the air felt tainted by arrogance. Word of Eleanor's return to the royal court for the harvest banquet had spread quickly, and tongues sharpened in anticipation. Among those waiting was Duke Rowan of Kent, her former suitor, whose pride had never healed after she refused his proposal. Eleanor had not wished to attend, but duty to her aging father demanded her presence. Aidan came with her, not as a servant but as her husband, though few chose to acknowledge it. His plain attire and calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the jeweled lords who surrounded them. The murmurs began before they even entered the hall. "The lady brings her stableman again," one knight whispered. "Soon he'll be polishing the royal boots." Rowan approached with a smile too polished to be kind. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing just enough to feign courtesy. "And your companion. Still tending the horses, are you?" Aidan met his gaze without flinching. "I tend to what's mine," he said evenly. "That seems to trouble many." Rowan chuckled, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Ah, yes. A man of modest words and simpler origins. Tell me, do you plan to teach her how to shoe a horse, or is she content cleaning your hands after labor?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Eleanor's cheeks burned, but Aidan did not move, his expression unreadable. "My hands," he said at last, "have built what others only inherit. They've held reins, forged tools, and kept promises." "I wonder, Your Grace, what of yours ever held that wasn't handed to you?" The laughter turned sharp then, not against Aidan but against Rowan. A few courtiers smirked, some even nodding in approval. The Duke's face tightened, his charm slipping. "Careful, stableman." Insolence suits poorly on one of your station. Then perhaps, Aidan replied, his tone quiet but commanding, it is the station itself that's poorly suited to truth. For a moment, silence reigned. The crackle of the great hearth filled the void. Rowan's jaw clenched as he turned to Eleanor, forcing a brittle smile. You've chosen a sharp tongue to warm your cottage, my lady. Tell me, does he speak so boldly when no one's listening? Eleanor straightened. He speaks with honor, something you might find unfamiliar. Rowan's smile vanished. Your pity for him is misplaced, Eleanor. A woman of your birth could have commanded kingdoms. I would rather command my own heart, she said firmly, than be chained to one who serves his pride. The tension shattered when a servant spilled wine nearby, but the damage had been done. The crowd had seen Rowan humbled. His mockery turned to embarrassment. For the rest of the evening, whispers followed not Eleanor and Aidan, but Rowan. Later, as they left the castle under the dim glow of torches, Aidan took Eleanor's hand. You shouldn't have spoken so sharply, he murmured. I spoke truth, she said, still trembling with the remnants of anger. Why should I be silent while they humiliate us? Because truth has a price, he answered, glancing toward the darkened courtyard where the Duke's men lingered. And men like Rowan never pay it themselves. Eleanor studied him, sensing the weight beneath his calm. You weren't afraid, she said softly. You knew exactly how to turn his words against him. He smiled faintly. I've had practice standing before men who thought titles made them strong. Her breath caught at the quiet conviction in his tone, the glimpse of something older, deeper, a strength that came from command, not defiance. She wanted to ask where that practice came from, but he only squeezed her hand, guiding her toward the waiting carriage. Behind them, laughter resumed in the great hall, hollow and uncertain. For the first time, the whispers no longer cut at her. They belonged to those who feared what they did not understand. And as they disappeared into the night, Eleanor realized that the man beside her carried a power no crown could bestow, one born of truth, not title. Winter crept across England like a slow and silent tide. The fields beyond Wessex lay bare, and the winds carried a sharpness that bit through wool and resolve alike. Eleanor wrapped her cloak tighter as she walked through the village, sensing something different in the air, a tension, invisible yet heavy, as though the land itself waited for something dark to unfold. Rumours had begun to seep into the corners of every tavern and chapel. Merchants whispered of rebellion in the north, of lords who defied the crown and rallied behind a banner no one dared name aloud. The wolf stirs again, they said, eyes darting as if afraid the wind might carry their words to the wrong ears. Eleanor pretended not to listen, but her thoughts kept circling back to Aidan. He had grown restless, his calm replaced by long silences and walks that stretched past dusk. Some nights she woke to find him sitting by the fire, eyes lost to the flames as though searching for something beyond their glow. One evening, as she entered the cottage, she found him tightening the strap of a worn leather bracer on his forearm. That's not for tending horses, she said quietly. Aidan looked up, startled, then sighed. No, it's for remembering who I used to be. Her heart quickened. And who was that? He hesitated, then shook his head. Someone who thought he could change a broken world. Someone who failed. Eleanor stepped closer. You haven't failed me. A faint smile touched his lips, but his eyes stayed distant. This isn't about us, Eleanor. The world beyond Wessex is shifting. Men with crowns are hungry for land, and men without them are hungry for justice. Both kinds spill blood to feed their hunger. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Are you saying there will be war? There already is, he replied. It just hasn't reached us yet. For days after, Aidan's behavior grew stranger. He spent hours training with wooden staves in the field, his movements too precise to belong to a mere horseman. Eleanor watched from the doorway, realizing that every motion carried the weight of discipline, of memory. When she finally asked why, he simply said, "A dull blade serves no one." At the castle, the talk grew louder. Lady Margaret, once Eleanor's friend, now regarded her with barely hidden contempt. "You chose poorly," she said during a brief encounter in the chapel courtyard. "When war comes, the crown will protect its own. Commoners will be left to the wolves. Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. Perhaps it's the wolves who will do the protecting. The woman scoffed, but her words stung deeper than Eleanor admitted. Each day, the divide between her noble birth and her new life widened. Courtiers spoke of loyalty, but their eyes betrayed fear. Lords pledged fealty to whoever promised safety. And through it all, Aidan grew more distant, as though the storm outside had already reached his soul. One night, as snow began to fall, Eleanor found him packing a small satchel. "You're leaving?" she whispered, the words barely forming. "Only for a few days," he said. "There are men I must see, old friends." Her voice broke. "You mean soldiers?" He stopped, his back to her. "If I could stop what's coming, I would, but silence won't hold forever." Eleanor moved closer, resting her hand on his arm. "Then let me help." He turned to her, eyes filled with both love and sorrow. "You already do. Every day you remind me what I'm fighting for." The firelight flickered between them, casting his face in shades of gold and shadow. She wanted to ask more, to demand the truth he still withheld, but something told her that whatever he carried was heavier than words could bear. As he stepped into the cold, the sound of the wind seemed to whisper his name, mingled with the faint echo of distant horns, and though Eleanor tried to steady her heart, she knew the peace they had built was beginning to crack. Somewhere beyond the frost and silence, war was awakening. The snow melted slowly that spring, reluctant to loosen its hold on the land. The fields near Wessex shimmered with frost, and the air carried the scent of thawing earth. Aidan had been gone for nearly a fortnight, and each dawn without him pressed heavier upon Eleanor's heart. She spent her days tending the cottage, her nights restless, haunted by the echo of his last words. "You remind me what I'm fighting for." One morning, while sweeping the hearth, her broom caught against a loose stone near the wall. Curious, she knelt and pried it free. Beneath it lay a small wooden box wrapped in coarse linen. Inside, beneath a folded scrap of cloth, gleamed a silver pendant, the shape of a wolf crowned in flame. The emblem was delicate, finely worked, and unlike anything a common man could possess. Her hands trembled as she lifted it into the light. She had seen that symbol once before, on the mysterious seal of the letters Aidan tried to hide. A rush of confusion and fear washed over her. The pendant wasn't just a token of wealth. It was a mark of power, of bloodline. Who was he truly, she thought? What has he kept from me? That night, the door creaked open. Aidan stepped inside, his cloak damp with rain, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Before he could speak, Eleanor held out the pendant. "You left something behind," she said quietly. He froze. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he took a slow breath. "You weren't meant to find that." "I wasn't meant to know who my husband truly is." Her voice trembled between anger and heartbreak. "You swore there were no more secrets." Aidan's expression softened with regret. "I swore I'd keep you safe, and the fewer people who know what that crest means, the safer you are." "Then tell me," she demanded. "Tell me why a horseman carries the mark of a crown." He hesitated as though weighing years of silence against the truth. Finally he spoke. "Before Wessex, before you, I was called Aidan of Northumbria. My father was King Edric, the last rightful ruler before the crown turned south and the dukes divided the land. When the rebellion came, I led men into battle under that wolf." Eleanor's breath caught. "You're saying you were—" "I was meant to inherit the throne," he interrupted gently, "but I refused to fight for power built on blood. When my father fell, I walked away. The crown called it treason. I called it mercy." The weight of his words hung between them like the silence before a storm. She tried to speak but found her voice trapped in her throat. "All these years," Aidan continued, "I've tried to live as a man, not a king. I buried that crest so no one would see it and remember the blood I've spilled." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. "And yet the past finds you still. Those letters, the rebellion, they're calling you back, aren't they?" He didn't answer, but the sorrow in his gaze spoke enough. "If I return," he said softly, "it's not for the crown. It's for the people who still suffer under the men who took it." Her heart broke between love and fear. You can't fight alone, she whispered. You'll lose yourself to the very thing you fled. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. Then promise me this. If the storm comes, you'll remember the man, not the name. Eleanor nodded, though the promise burned like iron in her chest. When Aidan left the next morning, she watched him until he disappeared into the misted hills. Her fingers clutched the pendant tightly, the cold metal biting into her palm. She finally understood. She had not married a simple man, but one who carried the weight of a kingdom, and the ghosts that came with it. The spring thaw had given way to a restless summer, and with it came whispers that moved through the corridors of Castle Wessex like smoke. A feast had been called in honor of Duke Rowan's return from the southern campaign, a night meant for unity and merriment. Yet beneath the laughter, tension brewed like storm clouds behind silk draperies. Eleanor had not wanted to attend. Since Aidan's departure weeks earlier, her heart carried the ache of absence and the weight of the secret he had left her. But the Queen's invitation could not be refused. Dressed in muted velvet, she entered the grand hall, her every step followed by the same sharp eyes that once mocked her marriage. Duke Rowan stood near the high table, his smile polished as ever, but there was something in his gaze, something triumphant, as if he already knew the ending to a story no one else had heard. "Lady Eleanor," he greeted, bowing with exaggerated grace. "It warms me to see you again, alone, I presume?" Eleanor met his look evenly. "My husband's business keeps him elsewhere. I see your manners are still as thin as your humility." His grin did not falter. "Ah, but it is his business that interests me most." For a man so humble, he seems to stir an uncommon amount of attention from the Crown's agents. Her pulse quickened, though she willed her expression to remain calm. "You've been listening to gossip again, my lord. It ill suits a duke to trade in tavern talk." "Oh, I listen to more than gossip," Rowan said, stepping closer, lowering his voice until only she could hear. "I listen to letters intercepted on the northern road, sealed with a wolf's head in silver." The world seemed to tilt beneath her. She forced her voice steady. "You're lying." He chuckled softly. "Am I?" "The King's Council grows concerned, Lady Eleanor. They wonder how a lady of Wessex came to wed a man who signs his name with the crest of a fallen kingdom." Before she could respond, he raised his goblet and called for attention. "My friends," he declared, his voice cutting through the music, "a toast to truth unmasked and loyalty revealed." All eyes turned toward him. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as Rowan continued, his words sharp as blades. "We dine tonight with nobility once thought lost. Tell me, my lady, should we bow to you or to the man who hides behind your name? The Wolf of the North, they called him once." A murmur spread through the hall, rising into shocked gasps. Eleanor's heart pounded. The secret Aidan had buried, the name he had forsaken, was now torn open before them all. She stood frozen, unable to speak, as Rowan smirked, savoring the destruction he had unleashed. "A traitor in our midst," he said coldly, "a rebel in disguise. Did you think the Crown would not learn?" "Enough," Eleanor's voice rang out, her fear melting into fury. "You twist truth to poison it. My husband has harmed no one. He turned his back on war to live in peace, something you could never understand." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Peace is cowardice when the law demands loyalty. He abandoned his crown. That makes him guilty of treason." Guards moved before she could react, heavy boots echoing against the stone. Two men in the king's colours stepped forward. "By order of His Majesty," one said, "Aidan of Northumbria is to be seized for questioning. Until his surrender, his wife is to remain under watch." Eleanor's knees weakened, but she held her head high. "You'll regret this, Rowan," she whispered. "The truth you think you've buried will rise higher than your title." He leaned close, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Then pray your king returns before his past devours you both." As the guards escorted her away from the hall, the laughter resumed, nervous, uncertain, a cruel echo of the night she once thought she'd escaped. But this time, Eleanor did not bow to their scorn. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the castle walls, she knew Aidan would hear of this. And when he did, The world that mocked him would tremble. The days that followed were a blur of confinement and whispers. Eleanor remained in a guest chamber of the castle, watched by guards who avoided her eyes. The laughter of courtiers drifted faintly through the halls, but the warmth that once filled Wessex had turned cold. Every hour brought the same question to her mind. Had Aidan been captured, or had he vanished once more into the northern mists? On the third morning, a summons arrived, sealed with the royal crest. The Queen herself had called for her. Fear and faint hope collided in Eleanor's chest as she was escorted through the long corridors toward the solar where Queen Adeline awaited. The Queen was not the woman Eleanor remembered from her father's courtly visits. Time had softened neither her poise nor her perception. Her silver hair framed eyes as sharp as the edge of tempered steel. "Lady Eleanor," she said, her tone calm yet commanding, "you stand accused by rumor and protected by doubt. I would hear the truth from your own lips." Eleanor curtsied deeply. "Your Majesty, I have never conspired against the crown. My husband sought only peace." Adeline regarded her for a long moment. Peace is a noble thing, but men who flee crowns rarely find it. "Tell me, did you know what name he once bore?" "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "He told me when he believed it would no longer endanger me." "He walked away from bloodshed, not loyalty." The Queen's expression softened just enough to show thoughtfulness. "Your words sound sincere, yet the Council fears the Wolf of the North still has teeth." Eleanor met her gaze. "If my husband has teeth, it is only to defend those the crown has forgotten." Adeline leaned back, fingers steepled beneath her chin. "You speak with courage." "That is rare among the nobility. I lost the luxury of fear when I chose love over pride," Eleanor replied. The faintest smile curved the Queen's lips. "A lesson I once learned too late." She rose and crossed to the window, looking out over the grey courtyard below. "When I was your age, I loved a man who carried a banner the king despised. I chose duty instead. I still wonder what peace might have grown had I chosen differently." Eleanor watched her carefully. "Then you understand my heart." "I do," Adeline admitted. "But the court does not forgive women who love too boldly, nor does it forgive men who remind them of their own cowardice." For the first time, Eleanor sensed something beyond pity in the Queen's eyes. Respect, perhaps even alliance. "Listen to me, child," Adeline said, turning toward her. "Duke Rowan believes he has won. He plays the council like a minstrel plays strings, all to mask his ambition. If your husband lives, he must be warned. Rowan seeks to claim the North in the king's absence. He will use treachery to do it." Eleanor's breath caught. "Then you believe Aidan still lives?" "I believe men like him do not vanish easily," the Queen replied. "The world bends around them for better or worse. I will not condemn him without proof." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But until then, you must play their game. Hold your head high. Let them see not a fallen lady, but a woman who endures." The court forgets. Women build alliances in whispers while men shout them into war. Eleanor bowed her head. "What would you have me do?" "Wait," Adeline said simply, "and listen. The walls of Wessex speak to those patient enough to hear." The Queen reached for a small ring on her finger, a silver band carved with the faint mark of a wolf. She pressed it into Eleanor's palm. "If the time comes when you cannot speak truth openly, show this. It will find ears loyal to the North." Eleanor's throat tightened. "Your Majesty, why help me?" Adeline's gaze drifted toward the window again. "Because once, long ago, a man I loved refused a crown for honor. I would not see another die for the same virtue." When Eleanor left the chamber, the guards no longer looked at her with scorn, but with a quiet, unspoken respect. She felt the weight of the ring against her skin, cold, deliberate, powerful. For the first time since Aidan's departure, hope flickered within her. Not loud, not certain, but steady, like a heartbeat waiting for its echo. Night cloaked Castle Wessex in silence, the kind that made even the guards' torches flicker with unease. Since her meeting with Queen Adeline, Eleanor had waited, listening to every whisper, searching for any word of Aidan. But it wasn't until the 7th night that she heard the rumor, low, hushed, almost fearful, that a man had been brought to the dungeons under secret orders, hidden from the court's eyes. Her pulse quickened. She said nothing, asked nothing, and yet her steps found their way down the narrow stone passages beneath the great hall. The air grew colder with each turn, the scent of damp and iron thickening as the flicker of a lone lantern guided her path. At last, she saw him. Behind rusted bars, sitting with his back against the wall, was Aidan. His face was bruised, his hair matted, but his eyes, those steadfast, unyielding eyes, lifted the moment he heard her breath catch. "Eleanor," he whispered. The sound of his voice nearly undid her. She gripped the bars, her hands trembling. "They said you were gone," she breathed. "I thought—" "I'm here," he said softly. "For now." Tears blurred her sight. "Rowan betrayed you. He told them everything." "I expected as much," Aidan replied. "He's been waiting for the chance to make himself a hero. But truth isn't his to wield." She studied him through the shadows, her heart breaking at the sight of his chains. "The council calls you a traitor. They say you sought to raise men against the crown. And what do you believe?" His voice carried no accusation, only weary honesty. Eleanor met his gaze. "I believe you walked away from war because you knew what it cost. I believe you love this land more than those who rule it." For a long moment neither spoke. The cold wind from the corridor whispered between them. Then Aidan smiled faintly, the expression fractured but real. "That's enough to keep me standing." She pressed her hand through the bars, fingers brushing against his. The roughness of his skin felt like a promise that refused to fade. "There must be a way out," she said desperately. "The Queen, she doesn't believe the charges. Aidan shook his head. "If Adeline moves too soon, the council will turn on her. Rowan's ambition runs deep. He'll twist loyalty into treason until every noble fears their own shadow." "Then what will you do?" she whispered. He leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "Wait. Let them think they've broken me. But when the time comes, when the truth must stand against the lie, I'll rise. Until then, promise me something." "Anything," she said. "Promise me you'll live. Don't let this court make you small again. The wolves survive because they endure." Her tears fell silently. "I can't stand by while they chain you." "You won't," he said softly. "You'll stand for me." "That's harder." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking into her bones. "Then hear my vow," she said, her voice trembling but sure. "As long as breath fills me, I'll fight for your name, and if the world calls it treason, so be it." Aidan closed his eyes for a moment, as if sealing the oath in silence. When he opened them, there was no fear left, only fire. "Then we're bound, you and I. Not by crown or court, but by truth." Footsteps echoed in the corridor above them. She drew back quickly, but he caught her hand one last time. "Eleanor," he murmured, "when they drag me to answer their lies, don't weep. Look them in the eye, and let them see the strength they mocked." "I will," she whispered, swallowing the ache that burned her throat. As the guards' voices grew closer, she slipped into the shadows, her heart hammering with both dread and defiance. Behind her, Aidan's voice lingered in the darkness, calm and unbroken. "They can cage my body," he said quietly, "but never the right to lead." And for the first time since his arrest, Eleanor believed it. 3 nights passed since Eleanor's secret visit to the dungeon. Each one stretched endlessly, filled with the sound of the wind battering the castle walls and the steady march of boots in the corridors above. The court had grown restless. The council demanded answers, the Queen kept her silence, and Rowan smiled like a man who believed the game already won. But outside the castle gates something was stirring. Messengers rode through the frost-laced dawns bearing tidings from the north, of villages refusing tax, of banners raised in defiance, of men whispering an old name by firelight. The Wolf of Northumbria had not been forgotten. Eleanor learned of it from a servant loyal to the Queen, a quiet man named Alaric who appeared at her chamber door one morning. "The North is moving," he said under his breath. "They claim their king lives. They march not for vengeance, but for justice." Her heart leapt. Do they know he's imprisoned? They know only that the crown fears him, Alaric replied, "and that fear is enough to ignite loyalty." He glanced toward the corridor. "Her Majesty has ordered your release from watch. You are to leave the castle at dusk. Take the northern road. Why would she free me? Because she believes your husband's fate cannot be decided by this court. The Queen has faith in older loyalties, ones forged in blood and truth." At sunset, Eleanor rode out from Wessex beneath a veil of cloud. The ring Adeline had given her glimmered faintly against her glove. Behind her, the towers of her father's land disappeared into the mist. Ahead lay uncertainty and frost, but also purpose. The journey north was long and perilous. She travelled by forest paths and quiet villages, hearing fragments of stories at every hearth. Peasants spoke of hidden camps gathering under the sign of the Silver Wolf. Some swore they'd seen riders wearing no heraldry, only grey cloaks and resolve. Others claimed a message was spreading. The true king will rise when the dawn meets the frost. One evening, as she stopped by a half-ruined chapel for shelter, a figure emerged from the shadows. The man's face was roughened by travel, his cloak heavy with snow, but his eyes were kind. "You bear the Queen's mark," he said, noticing the ring as she lifted her lantern. Eleanor nodded. "I ride for Northumbria." He inclined his head with reverence. "Then you ride for all of us." The stranger led her through the dark woods to a hidden encampment. Dozens of men gathered there, farmers, smiths, soldiers, who had long since abandoned the southern lords. They greeted her with wary curiosity until the old knight at their head stepped forward. "I am Sir Aldred," he said. "I fought beside King Edric, and under his son, Aidan. If you are his wife, then you carry the heart of our cause." Eleanor's voice trembled. "He lives, but he's chained beneath Wessex, branded a traitor." The murmurs grew fierce. Aldred's jaw set. "Then the time for waiting is done." She looked around at the faces lit by torchlight, faces lined with hardship and loyalty. "He never sought a throne," she said, her voice rising with quiet conviction. "He fled bloodshed to protect the innocent. But if his silence has built your strength, then his truth deserves your courage. Will you stand not for vengeance, but for the honor he carries?" A hush fell over the camp. Then one by one the men knelt. "For the wolf," they said in unison. "For the king who would not kneel." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. In that moment she understood what Aidan had meant in the dungeon. His fight was never for power, but for faith. As dawn broke across the ridge, Aldred handed her a banner wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it carefully. Upon it gleamed the Silver Wolf reborn. "Carry it to Wessex," the knight said. "Let them see the North still remembers." Eleanor gripped the banner tight. The wind caught its edge, and for a heartbeat it seemed alive, howling a promise that would shake the realm. The northern wind carried the scent of iron and ash. Eleanor rode through the chill dawn, her cloak stiff with frost, the Silver Wolf banner strapped to her saddle. Every mile took her farther from the world she had known, and deeper into one that tested her resolve. She was no longer the noble daughter of Wessex, nor the quiet wife of a horseman. She was a messenger of defiance. Behind her rode Sir Aldred and a small band of loyalists. The old knight's voice, roughened by years of war, guided them through the wild lands that once belonged to Aidan's family. "The road to Alnwick is treacherous," he warned, as their horses trudged through mud and snow. "But if we can reach the fortress before Rowan's men, we'll have ground strong enough to hold." Eleanor nodded, though exhaustion gnawed at her bones. Her hands were raw from cold, her body worn thin by sleepless nights, but she refused to falter. Each step northward felt like an oath renewed. When they stopped by a frozen stream to rest, Aldred studied her quietly. "You carry yourself like one born to command," he said. "Has your husband taught you that?" She smiled faintly. "He taught me to listen before I speak, and to stand even when silence is easier." The knight chuckled, the sound echoing against the stones. "A wise lesson. The North will need such wisdom more than swords." That night, as the men slept around dwindling fires, Eleanor wrote by the faint glow of embers. Her hand shook as she traced the words meant for Aidan. "They rise for you, not because of what you were, but because of what you still are." She folded the note and pressed it against her heart before tucking it away. as if the thought alone could reach him through iron and distance. 2 days later, the landscape shifted. Rolling hills gave way to rocky ridges where the air grew sharper, filled with the cry of distant crows. Alaric, who rode as their scout, returned with grim news. Rowan's banners were sighted near the southern road. "He moves faster than expected." Aldred's brow furrowed. "He means to crush the rebellion before it breathes." Eleanor's voice steadied, though her heart pounded. "Then we cannot wait for war to come to us. We must reach Alnwick first." They pressed onward, their path winding through narrow valleys where mist clung low and wolves howled across the ridges. The journey tested them beyond endurance. Food ran scarce, hooves bled, and more than once they buried a fallen horse with cold, numb hands. Yet in their hardship, Eleanor saw strength, the quiet, unyielding kind that Aidan had always carried. At dusk on the 6th day, the towers of Alnwick finally rose before them, dark, silent and still. The fortress, abandoned after the fall of the Old Kingdom, loomed like a ghost of the past. As they approached, Aldred dismounted, pressing his hand to the stone gate. "Your husband's blood built this place," he said softly. "If the North must rise again, it begins here." Eleanor's breath shivered in the cold air. "Then let it rise for the right reasons." Inside the ancient walls, dust mingled with the scent of decay. But beneath it all there was something enduring, a memory of loyalty, of oaths sworn long ago. The men began to work without orders, repairing the battlements, clearing the courtyard. It was as if the fortress itself recognized them. That night, as fires lit the halls for the first time in years, Eleanor stood on the ramparts and watched the stars stretch over the northern sky. For the first time since Aidan's imprisonment, she felt the pull of hope as something tangible, alive. Aldred joined her, his weathered face lit by torchlight. "You've given them purpose," he said quietly. "Even without a crown, they see a leader when they look at you." "I'm no leader," she murmured. "Neither was he once," the knight replied. "But destiny has a way of finding those who run from it." The wind rose, carrying the faint sound of distant horns, low and haunting. Eleanor gripped the cold stone before her. "The world is answering his call," she whispered. The air around Alnwick was heavy with anticipation. The men of the north gathered beneath the old banners, their faces worn by travel, but their spirits steeled with purpose. Eleanor stood at the edge of the courtyard, her eyes scanning the vast horizon, where the first rays of dawn broke through the mist. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet peace of the earth before the blood of battle stained it. In the courtyard, Aldred's men worked feverishly, preparing for what was to come. They were outnumbered, undersupplied, but what they lacked in arms they made up for in grit. The loyalty they had once sworn to Aidan's father, now resurrected through him, had ignited a fire in their hearts that no amount of fear could quench. Eleanor walked among them, her steps purposeful. She had long shed the weight of the title Lady, for it no longer defined her. Now she was something else, something stronger. As she passed one group of soldiers, a young man no older than 17 stopped her. "My lady," he said, eyes full of respect, "is it true? Will the wolf lead us again?" Eleanor paused, meeting his gaze. For a moment she saw Aidan in the boy's eyes, untamed and proud. "He will," she replied, her voice firm. "When the time comes, he will lead us." The young man nodded, clenching his fist in quiet determination. "For the North." "For the North," she echoed. Aldred approached, his face grim but resolute. "The gates are ready. Our scouts report that Rowan's forces will be here within the day. We don't have much time." Eleanor's heart pounded at the thought of the coming clash. The men of Rowan, cruel and hungry for power, would stop at nothing to claim this fortress. And yet Alnwick stood as a symbol, one that could never be claimed by a false king. "I'll see to it that the wounded are ready for transport," she said, her voice carrying an edge of command she never thought she'd possess. Aldred nodded approvingly. "Your presence inspires more than any banner." "You lead by heart, Lady Eleanor." Her heart ached at his words, knowing that it was Aidan's blood that ran through her veins, not a crown. Yet she was ready for this fight, not for the kingdom, not for power, but for the man who had taught her that leadership was about sacrifice, not pride. As the day wore on, the tension grew unbearable. The sky darkened with the threat of rain, and the soldiers readied their weapons, sharpening swords and securing shields. Fires burned low in the hearths, casting long shadows across the stone walls. At dusk, they took their positions along the outer walls, waiting for the first sight of Rowan's army. The wind howled through the cracks in the ancient stone, carrying with it the stench of impending war. Elenor stood at the center of the rampart, gripping the banner tightly, her heart thundering in her chest. She had never wanted this battle, but it was a battle that was now hers to lead. The cries of the men, the clash of steel, the roar of the north, these were the sounds that would echo through history. The first of Rowan's soldiers appeared on the horizon, a black line against the fading light. Then came more, their banners fluttering in the wind, their faces grim with purpose. They had come for the throne, for the power they believed was rightfully theirs. But what they did not know was that Alnwick was no longer just a fortress. It was a heart that beat for something greater than any crown. As the armies drew closer, Eleanor's voice rang out, stronger than she had ever thought herself capable. We fight for the truth of our blood, for the honor of the North and for the future that will rise from the ashes of today. We fight, not for power, but for what is right. Her words rang through the walls like a challenge, a clarion call to all who stood with her. The men cheered, their voices a deafening roar that echoed across the battlements. And then, as the first wave of Rowan soldiers reached the gates, Elenor felt the earth tremble beneath her feet. The siege had begun. The clash of steel filled the air as the two armies collided. Shouts of war echoed through the night, as Alnwick's walls became the front line of a battle that would determine not just a kingdom, but the future of the North itself. Elenor stood firm, her heart and soul united with those who fought alongside her. For the first time she knew what it meant to lead, not from behind a crown, but from within the heart of the storm. The clash of swords rang through the night, each strike echoing like a heartbeat in the cold air. The gates of Alnwick held firm under the weight of Rowan's forces, but the battle was far from over. Elenor stood at the center of the chaos, her eyes scanning the battlefield as the Northern army fought with the fierce determination she had come to know in Aidan's blood. The walls trembled with the force of each strike, and the scent of smoke and iron filled her lungs. Yet in the heart of the siege, Elenor felt an unshakable resolve. She had never wanted war, but now in the midst of it, she knew this was the only path to the future, the path her husband had once chosen for them both. As the battle raged around her, her mind drifted briefly to Aidan, the man who had taught her what it meant to sacrifice everything for honor, for the land he had left behind. She could almost feel his presence beside her, his steady hand at her back. It was then that she heard it, an explosion of sound, a roar of battle that rose above the chaos. From the edge of the battlefield, through the smoke and shadows, a figure appeared. His presence seemed to part the storm of war itself. Aidan. Dressed in armor of silver and black, his face grim but determined, he rode through the melee, his horse cutting through the enemy lines with precision. His eyes burned with the fire of a leader reborn, and in that moment Elenor knew the man who had once turned his back on power was not the same. He had come for the kingdom, for justice, and for the truth of who he was. Aidan's sword flashed in the torchlight as he cut through the enemy, each blow a testament to his unyielding will. The men around him, those who had once sworn loyalty to his father, followed with the same ferocity. The tide of battle shifted as the North's banner, Eleanor's banner, flashed through the smoke, uniting the men in a roar of victory. Elenor stood tall as she watched him cut his way toward her, his eyes locked on hers, with an intensity that left her breathless. When he reached her, he dismounted, his armor gleaming in the firelight. For a moment, there was only silence between them, the weight of everything they had endured pulling them closer together. "You came back," Elenor whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "I never left," Aidan replied, his voice steady but filled with an ache that only she could hear. He reached for her, his hand rough but gentle as he cupped her face. "I'm here, Elenor. And now, we finish what we started." With his return, the battle seemed to pause as if the world itself held its breath. The northern soldiers, seeing their king once more, rallied with renewed strength. But as the conflict raged on, Elenor knew this was not just a fight for Alnwick, it was a fight for the soul of the North. Aidan's sword raised high, he led the charge, cutting through Rowan's forces with a deadly precision that only a king could command. "For the North!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the battleground. "For the North!" the soldiers roared back, their voices rising in unison, a chorus of defiance and loyalty. Elenor watched as Aidan moved with the fluidity of a man who had once been born to this life, a king in every sense of the word. She felt a swell of pride in her chest. The man who had once seemed broken had risen, not to reclaim a throne, but to reclaim his people. The battle raged on, but with Aidan at the helm, it was no longer just a war, it was a reclamation. The North was not a land of rebels and outlaws, it was a land of kings, and it would never bow to anyone who didn't stand for truth. As dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a bloody light on the battlefield, Elenor knew the fight was far from over. But in that moment, she saw what she had always believed in Aidan. He was no longer just the man who had once walked away from a crown. He was the Alpha King, the leader of the North, the man who would rise to bring justice to his people, and together they would rebuild what had been lost. The sun had barely risen over Alnwick when the last of Rowan's forces retreated, broken and scattered by the fierce rally of Aidan's men. The battlefield, once soaked in blood and smoke, now lay still under the pale light of dawn. The walls of the fortress had withstood, and as the victory settled into the quiet hum of the earth, Elenor stood at the heart of the victory. Beside the man she had loved, the man she had once feared she would lose forever. Aidan's armor was streaked with dirt and blood, his face smeared with the remnants of the fight, but his eyes shone with something fierce and new, something born from the battle, from the reclaiming of his kingdom. He was no longer the man who had fled a crown. He was the king who had risen from the ashes of the North. The moment the battle ended, the courtyard of Alnwick had erupted into cheers. Aidan had been raised on the blood of kings, but this victory was different. It was earned through love, through sacrifice, through truth. Elenor stood quietly by his side as the banners of the North fluttered in the wind. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and the freshness of rain. The men who had fought for him, for her, gathered around in silent reverence, awaiting the moment when they would honor their true king. Aidan turned to Elenor, his face softened by exhaustion and relief. "It's over," he said softly. But there was a weight to his words, an unspoken understanding. "We've won, but this is only the beginning." She nodded, her heart swelling in her chest. "I know." The weight of their shared journey, of every trial, every sacrifice, lay heavy in the air between them. Yet it was also a bond that held them together. The crown, the kingdom, and the rebellion. They had never been the heart of their story. Love had been. As the crowd quieted, the elders of the northern clans stepped forward, their faces graven with years of hardship and loyalty. In a gesture of honor and respect, they presented Aidan with the crown of his ancestors, forged from silver and obsidian. It was no grand spectacle. The crown was simple, practical, but in its simplicity lay the essence of Aidan's reign, humble, strong, and true. Aidan's hand hovered over the crown, his eyes locking with Eleanor's as he held it between them. In that instant, Elenor understood. He wasn't claiming power for himself. He was claiming it for the North, for the people who had suffered and fought alongside him. The crown was not a symbol of dominion, it was a symbol of responsibility. He placed the crown on his head, and a hush fell over the crowd. Aidan of Northumbria, once a man exiled from his birthright, now stood as the king of the North, the true heir to the land he had never abandoned. Elenor stepped forward, her hand on his arm, and the crowd parted for her. Her heart swelled with pride, with love, and with a quiet certainty that this was where they were meant to be. The love they had fought for was not just a fleeting thing. It was a promise, one that neither time nor war could erase. "You are king," she said softly. her voice carrying across the crowd. Not because of birthright, but because of the truth you carry in your heart. You lead because you are loved, not by force, but by those who choose to follow you. Aidan's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her, the crown now settled upon his brow. I lead because I stand beside you, he replied, his voice filled with the warmth of everything they had built together. We lead this land together. With those words, the final barrier between them, between the past and the future, was broken. The North, broken and divided, had found its king and its queen. Together, they would rule not from power, but from the same love that had brought them here, a love that had endured every trial, every hardship. The crowds cheered again, louder this time, their voices rising to meet the sky. But Eleanor knew it was not just the people who were rejoicing, it was the land itself, the land that had waited for this moment for so long. And as Aidan took her hand in his, she knew that no matter the battles that would come, they would face them together. For they were not just rulers of the North. They were its heart, and that heart beat with a love that could never be broken. The days that followed Alnwick's victory were filled with rebuilding. The smoke from the battle still lingered in the air, but the heart of the North was alive once more. Alnwick, once a shadow of its former self, stood proud again, its walls now a testament to the strength of those who had fought to protect it. But the real work, Eleanor knew, was just beginning. Aidan, crowned and unbowed, moved through the ranks of his people with a presence that commanded respect, not through the weight of his title, but through the weight of his actions. He didn't just give orders, he led by example, as he always had, always. The crown, once so heavy on his brow, now seemed to fit with ease, as though it had been waiting for him all along. And beside him, Eleanor stood as his queen, not by blood, but by choice. She had walked into this role with no desire for power, but with a desire to make a difference. Together they rebuilt the kingdom piece by piece. The people who had once whispered behind closed doors now spoke of hope. The northern lands, long forgotten by the southern courts, were alive again. Fields were replanted, towns rebuilt, and the harsh winters seemed a little less cruel when shared by those who understood each other's struggles. One evening, as they sat together by the fire in the great hall of Alnwick, Eleanor watched Aidan as he looked over the maps of the kingdom. His face, though tired, carried a new sense of peace. He had done what he had set out to do, not to claim a throne, but to give his people a chance. I thought it would feel different, Eleanor said softly, breaking the silence. I thought that once we had won, it would be all I ever dreamed of. Aidan's eyes lifted to hers, a smile tugging at his lips. And what did you dream of, Eleanor? She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her goblet. Of a world where love and loyalty meant more than titles. Of a life where we weren't defined by our past, but by the choices we made. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. And that's the world we're building now, together. The warmth of his touch sent a quiet thrill through her. She had never expected to find herself here, at the side of a king, but not in the way the world had once imagined. They weren't just rulers, they were partners. And together, they had created something new. The kingdom, still rebuilding, began to flourish. The rebellion had not only defeated an enemy, it had given birth to a new way of life, one that respected the land and the people who lived on it. But the greatest victory lay not in the land they had reclaimed, but in the love they had nurtured, love that had weathered storms and endured battles, love that had healed wounds, both old and new. As the seasons turned and the first blooms of spring appeared in the northern fields, Eleanor and Aidan stood together on the balcony of Alnwick's highest tower. The land before them stretched wide and endless, a future that had once seemed impossible now unfolding before their eyes. Aidan's hand rested on her shoulder, and for the first time, Eleanor saw the weight of the crown not as a burden, but as a promise of a future shaped by truth, love, and loyalty. They had not only rebuilt a kingdom, they had redefined what it meant to rule. No matter what the future holds, Aidan said softly, his voice steady, we will face it together. Eleanor smiled, her heart full of the love that had brought them this far. Together, she echoed. Always. And as the wind whispered through the trees and the sun dipped low on the horizon, They knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them with the same strength that had brought them to this moment, the strength of a love that could never be broken, no matter how fierce the storm. For the kingdom had been reborn, and with it, so had they.